Our theme for this year's Energy Summit is the heart of domestic production. And as we were planning this event, we felt like our trade associations had a lot to offer. So if you don't mind, please welcome to the stage, and she'll introduce her panel, Dr. Missy Currier from Strategies 360. Missy?
Good morning, everybody. My name is Missy Currier, and I would like to invite the panelists up to the stage, and as they come up, I'll introduce them. I'm very fortunate to get to have this conversation with these folks today. I get to consider them all friends, and we all get to work together often. As we get situated and settled, they'll get their microphones, and I'll introduce them as we're getting all switched around here. First of all, Doug Ackerman works for the New Mexico Oil and Gas Association. He's new to New Mexico, and we're very glad to have him here. He's got a ton of trade experience in other industries, and he brings that industry leadership to our region. We look forward to seeing him improve upon the marketing opportunities and other associations that we get to work with throughout the state. We also have Ben Shepard with the Permian Basin Petroleum Association. Ben has been working with trades so long that they're considering renaming the Permian Shepard, but he's really good at what he does, and we're really grateful to have him around. He didn't know I was going to say that. And we also have Jim Winchester with the Independent Petroleum Association of New Mexico, and we're very fortunate to get to work with all three. And one of the first questions that I'd like to ask these guys is, what is a trade? What do you guys do every day? And along with that, once you kind of describe what your trade does and the work that you do, can you tell us a little bit about the place that you see your trade working within New Mexico and why all three of your associations are necessary? Doug, let's start with you if you don't mind.
Don't start with a guy that they're going to name the Permian after, okay. Well, first of all, Missy, thank you for having us here. Mayor, thank you for having us, and thank you for not wearing a tie, Missy. I didn't get the memo from these other guys, so it's the new guy initiation, I think. But, trade associations, especially thinking about the trade association I just walked into, is a 94-year-old association. It was started on the heels of the Depression, trying to figure out how to market natural gas and oil in December of 1929. So if you think about how many things have changed since Prohibition and from 1929 till now, one of the key things that trade associations got to do is be nimble and be able to evolve and represent an entire industry generically, so that we understand that although a lot of us in the room are in the same industries and businesses, we have unique brands that have unique niches within the industry, and we all market accordingly. But at a larger level, the job of the trade is to find areas that we can stack hands on as an industry and lead and move forward, and you've got to be nimble how you do that. There's an overall mission of supporting and defending, and then you get into different areas over time with regulatory, environmental, and some of the other things that, as a trade association, it brings the industry together so that we can make decisions on behalf of the industry as a whole.
Jim, what are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, thanks, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to the Carlsbad greater community. Love coming down here. It's fantastic turnout, and this has been one of the best run conferences that I've attended over the course of the last 5-6 years. The motto of Independent Petroleum Association of New Mexico is sort of twofold. Number one, for us to be the voice of the independent producers in New Mexico. And independent is a name that encompasses a lot of different categories, but I think the way I like to describe it to folks is that we represent little oil as opposed to big oil. At the same time, because of our association is so unique, we welcome and are very grateful for the support of a lot of the majors. Because I think what it all does is it ties into everything that we all do up here, which is the second part of our motto, which is to defend, protect, and to promote the industry of oil and gas in New Mexico. And I can't say enough about the cooperative efforts, and I think we'll get into more of that a little bit later, but what is going on right now behind the scenes is unlike anything I've seen over the course of my 5-6 years here in New Mexico related to what's going on in industry to defend, protect, and promote. So I think that with the collective voices of all the operators out there, we have a real opportunity to definitely put us more on the front stage, particularly in communities that aren't here in the oil community, like the Santa Fe's and the Albuquerques of the world. So I think our messaging and our cooperation leads to those sorts of results.
Ben can talk a little bit more about this, but PBPA is unique because it represents all of the Permian, including both New Mexico and Texas. So I'm really interested in your opinion on what it is your trade does and how PBPA is in that space.
Thank you, Dr. Courier and Mr. Mayor. It's an honor to be here. I think she was being kind, basically in the introduction, and basically just it's a nice way to say I'm old.
Seasoned, Ben.
I have been with the Permian Basin Petroleum Association for over 16 years now, so I guess that gives me some age. I did not have any gray hair when I started. I got plenty now. And the Permian has changed in extraordinary ways since 2006 when I first started. And you know, a couple of things, we can talk a little bit more about the Permian development in a minute because it's a fascinating story we all live every day. But we have two slogans that we like to talk about at the PBPA right now anyway, in this current environment, political environment. Midland, not Moscow, and Carlsbad, not the Kremlin. And so, you know, when we're talking about, thank you. We do represent, we're a little bit unique in that we are a regional, old regional trade that was formed in 1961, basically because the Permian Basin was pretty isolated. In many respects, it still is, although everyone in the world today has heard of the Permian Basin. But since 1961, we've been trying to our slogan is the advocation of the safe and responsible natural resources located in the Permian Basin. And real proud of the work that the industry has done and is doing and will do. Associations exist so that industries like ours, which have so many different family members and moving parts and integral pieces that make it all work, can work to try to have a singular voice, to advocate, get on the same page, all of those sort of acronyms or metaphors, but you know, it's a challenge for us because the industry's constantly changing. In 2006, again, when I started, frankly, the Permian was a historic oil field with lots of small independents. Most of the majors and large independents had moved on to greener pastures over the and for example, we were producing in both the Texas and New Mexico less than 1 million barrels a day. Obviously, now we're producing as a region over 5 and 5.5, with projections to go over to 6. With all of the good that does and that our members do, we have become a target in many, many ways. And associations give us an opportunity to band together in like-minded goals, because I can assure you that the folks that do not like our industry, they are organized and they belong to groups and they message in a uniform way that makes it much more challenging for us to sort of push back in doing the great things this industry does.
Recognizing that you guys are all working towards the same goal, but you also have different intentions with your individual trades, it's important for us, and there's several of the companies in this room that are actually members of all 3 of your organizations. And if you aren't a member, I'm sure they would love to take your money. But with that in mind, how, Ben, do you guys work together across PBPA, IPA&M, and NMOGA to make a stronger voice on behalf of industry to bring that unified front that you were just discussing?
I'll take a stab at that one, and it is critically important that we do work together, and we do, and there are other associations as well, but as the 3 that are focused on the Permian Basin primarily, it is imperative, because we do have quite a bit of overlap in membership, and we all have our different committees, which are made up of volunteers. Many of you in this room belong to one or more of us. And the work gets done, the policy decisions and goals get set at the committee level, and then we compare notes frankly. There's overlap between NMOGA and us and IPA&M on various different issues. There's subject matter experts at different companies that help us out. And then we talk on a fairly regular basis. It's like, okay, and we're planning to talk here in the next few weeks as we begin to prepare for next session. But it's like, have you heard the latest crazy idea that our members want to do next? And sometimes it goes that way. It's like, do they not realize what a terrible idea that is, or what have you? But no, it's a family in many respects, and with any good family, we don't always agree 100% and take different approaches. But that's just kind of how we do it.
And I would say that we don't always agree is actually to our strategic advantage in a lot of situations. Getting back to that, I'll get back to that in just a second, but I do want to echo a few things that Ben said specifically. Whenever we hear of a new regulation being thought of in one of our government agencies, or whenever we are up in Santa Fe during a legislative session and information comes out about a potential bill, either for or against industry, what we are able to do because of the collective power of 3 associations and thousands of members is share information. And I can tell you from my experience, the most important commodity up in Santa Fe during a legislative session is information. And the sharing that goes on amongst these agencies is a real advantage to all of our members because we have triple the amount of people out talking to the various legislators, the various lobbyists and interest groups, and we meet weekly during the sessions jointly amongst all of our associations to share that information and then strategically plan ways to defend against certain bills, work with the various legislators to promote certain bills. And I can't tell you from my position what a unique position that is to be in. And I'm very grateful for the umbrella that both of these associations cast over the entire state, because that information share makes a big difference.
Doug, I'd love for you to add on to their thoughts, but also I know you come from a strong marketing background. Can you talk a little bit about why the marketing of the industry story is so important to the trade work that you guys do?
Sure, absolutely, thank you. As the new guy on the panel up here, I just want to stop and say thanks to these guys in particular, and Missy for orienting me down here. But when we're talking about how we work together, there's been absolutely zero ego involved in any of this. It's we all have common ground, we all have the same interest in the same industry. We have slight differences in our makeup or things that, like Jim said, are competitive advantages moving forward, where it makes sense for one of us to take the lead on something while the other one stands back and occupies a supporting role. But these guys have been welcoming to me and helping to orient me and creating a very transparent environment for us to bounce ideas off each other and hey, have you heard what's going on, kind of like what Ben said. But with my background in marketing and kind of a brand guy, one of the things that really drew me to this position was the opportunity to take back our message. If you look at who owns the brand for oil and gas, and a brand is nothing more than an emotional connection. If you think about the tennis shoes you wear, or whatever your favorite vehicle that you drive or anything, you have an emotional connection to that. And if you think about who owns the messaging and the brand image for oil and gas, is it us? And I don't think that it is. It's, if you look at what we're going up against from an environmental NGO standpoint and the messaging that they create and the narrative that they push, it's not a positive thing for this industry. So as we move forward, one of the things that we're focusing on heavily now is really telling our own story. We don't get enough credit for what we do environmentally. We don't get enough credit for the people in this industry. And you look at the awards that were given last night for both environmental and the people that do the work. I mean, it's an amazing asset to this industry that we need to tell everybody and own our story. Not only own it, but be proud of it. It's walking the streets of Santa Fe and you get some interesting looks when people find out what you do, but you own it and you're proud of it, because we are proud. We're all of us up here are very proud to work for you all and proud to work in this industry.
Thank you. And you mentioned the environmental piece and how the environmental side can certainly be something that is difficult for industry to talk about. I think that all of us in this room can agree that industry does a great job of doing better, but industry should always do better. And with that in mind, we talk a lot and hear a lot at both the federal and state level about regulations that are changing in the coming months and potentially in the coming years. Around those discussions currently, we've talked a lot about non-attainment zones throughout the Permian. Can you tell us a little bit about what the heck a non-attainment zone is and why that might be cause for concern throughout New Mexico and Texas? Jim, if you don't mind, I think we'll start with you.
Sure. It is a designation by the federal government of certain areas based on emissions numbers that they are interpreting, which then kicks into effect tougher and stronger regulations for operators, and not just operators in oil and gas, but across the board in all manufacturing. I will be the first to tell you that my personal opinion is that it's very political. It's a political tool that's been used really for the last 5 years, sort of as a Damocles sword holding over industry, because they like to target oil and gas first, because in their minds it's low-hanging fruit. However, we know and we are pretty certain at this point that it's coming for the Permian Basin. The unfortunate reality is that a lot of the readings that are being taken place are not based necessarily on fact or emissions that are coming from our area. They're coming up from Mexico. So once again, we have to proclaim that based on science, there really isn't a need for this at this point in time. The second thing related to this about the Damocles sword part of it is that we've heard for the last 3 years from the state administration here that we better get these methane rules into place quickly, because if not, we could slip out of attainment. And that was sort of the motivational marketing push that they were doing with us here in New Mexico. And then as soon as we've got those rules into place, I was very disappointed to see the comments from our environment secretary, who said, well, industry didn't work fast enough to get those rules into place, when in fact industry was, first of all, already ahead of it in terms of technology on their own, but second of all, we were the ones that came to the table with the government to try to get better rules in place. From our perspective, and this is a whole different topic of conversation, the rules that are in place now go a little bit further than needed, specifically on their impact on small producers, which is why we, IPA&M, are suing the state over these rules. But I don't want that to take away from the bigger picture here that we as an industry support good environmental regulation. And emissions are certainly extremely important. What we are seeking at IPA&M in this particular instance is just a level playing field to make sure that the rules are not written such that it takes smaller independents out of operation just because of the feasibility to operate and the cost that are inhibited with these regulations. But the point being is that continuing to contrast that with our need as industries to make sure that the world knows what we are doing environmentally and the strides that we have made. One of the reasons that we have cleaner emissions now more than ever is because of the proliferation of natural gas. That is the key right now to better emissions. And unfortunately, what we're seeing is a little bit of an overstep to try to not only get rid of oil, but also gas, which is in fact the real reason why we have emissions that are better right now than in the past.
Doug, if you don't mind, I'll go to you next, and then we're gonna come in clutch with Ben.
Sounds like a plan. I don't know what I can add to that. That was a pretty thorough discussion. I think, going back to kind of tying in us working together and talking together, we've already had discussions and met with Stephen on PBPA staff and Corey down at Texoga to just open the lines of communication. We don't know exactly what's going to happen with the non-attainment designation and what that means strategically. Texas and New Mexico are very different states, and how we approach that designation may differ, but it's also we need to be in contact and understand what each organization is doing, and again, represent the industry as a whole. So we're waiting, but we're also talking. So it'll be interesting when it hits, and we'll figure out a strategy on how we move forward with it.
Well, we appreciate that you guys are looking in a very forward manner of how to create a strategy that will best work. And Ben, the reason I wanted you to answer this question last is twofold. Number one, you're brilliant, of course. But also,
That sounds like a setup.
but also because you're in a very unique situation that you do work Texas and New Mexico. And Doug made the comment that they're very different states, and you handle both of the states very differently for political reasons, for geographic reasons, all kinds of things. So I'd like you to answer a little bit of the non-attainment, but also what it's like to work the two different sides, and then also tell us why the Delaware Basin is your favorite part of the Permian Basin.
Well, I'll start with the latter, and that's easy. It's the best rocks, the best geology in the entire Permian. That's what most of you know already. It's the people. It's the opportunity, and believe me, it is our vision that we're going to be producing oil and gas in the Delaware and throughout the Permian for decades to come. And it's just what we're going to do. One way or another, we're going to face these challenges together and work through them. And yes, the two states are, there are some differences. But I think one thing for certain is that we share is that we don't know. We are in regular contact with the Texas Governor's Office, and they have inquired of EPA. He has inquired, just what's the status, and we, to our pretty recent best of knowledge, we have not gotten an answer yet. So to your point, that could it be political? Because I think that's likely, shocking to everyone in this room here, make an announcement. There may be politics involved. There may be politics involved. And let's just look. We talked about the methane rules here and others, but you've got greenhouse. The EPA has got a suite of other rulemakings already underway. So the non-attainment may be the largest by far because of the broader impacts it would have on transportation, construction, anything that moves. And frankly, the data's a little shaky. The readings, as I understand it, the readings in one of the Carlsbad monitors are close to the 70 parts per billion. They are under the 70 parts per billion in the Hobbs area. And then unfortunately, we don't have any monitors in Texas. So the leap, and listening to other scientific folks describe, to Doug's point, I think it was, that they're not able to pinpoint that these, where all the emissions are coming from. And some estimates, less than 15% is actually coming from oil and gas. Much of it is coming up from our southern neighbor, and that's a challenge that this approach would do very little to fix. What it would do was slam the brakes on economic growth and development throughout the region, and cause years and years of permitting. Number one, we'd have to develop the rules and work. Supposedly, we would be at the table working with the agency to develop the implementation plans and so on. And these are big issues. The state, the governors of both states will be involved and so on. And it's interesting. There could be a difference in opinion from the New Mexico governor's office to the Texas governor's office. I'm not sure they're in alignment on this one. I know for sure where the Texas Governor Greg Abbott is. But just yesterday, I heard some numbers from the Texas Controller, who, like the rest of us, is very concerned about the potential impact of a non-attainment designation on the Permian Basin, most prolific oil field in the world, and the tremendous impact it has on the states of Texas and New Mexico. And he said, because there's so many unknown variables, they picked an impact of 10. So let's just say that, this is the Comptroller's Office, let's say it impacts or reduces oil and gas output and production by 10%, just 10%. Pretty low number. Many people would probably say, yikes, if this happens, it's going to be a bigger number than 10% in terms of impact. However, the 10% number, and again, these are the Texas numbers, but would have a 10% reduction would have a 16 $16 billion impact on the state of Texas. And so, you know, as we try to work through this, I mean, the EPA will tell you, well, they're not concerned with economic impact. It's not their purview. It's not their mandate. Yet these impacts are real. Somewhere in the neighborhood of 25,000 jobs would be lost if a 10% reduction in Permian Basin oil and gas. Okay, these numbers are huge, and that everybody reckons that's just 10%. And again, we're shooting in the dark here, but the stakes are very high. We don't really have any concrete path forward at this point. It's up to the administration right now.
I want to talk a little bit, Jim, before we move on, but you've talked a little bit about little oil, and we've got some of the big guys in the room in here. We have some of the independents in here, but little oil is just as lovable as big oil. And with that in mind, 20 years ago, independent producers were drilling 90% of domestic wells. We've seen that number continue to decline for a multitude of reasons. How important is the argument at the Roundhouse in Santa Fe that independent producers and their continued operations as a critical component to the industry?
Well, I don't want to make this little versus big because we're all on the same team. One thing I do want to emphasize, and that's amazing, is that we're seeing still, despite everything that we're fighting right now, production increases continually every quarter coming out of the Delaware Basin and the Permian, which is fantastic. The argument for independence is really fascinating if you go back into history, and you can look into history as to why it's so important. And the most recent history that is a perfect example of this is what happened 20 years ago when Mitchell Energy and then Devon came in and bought them out, and they decided to push forward some innovative ideas of combining horizontal drilling with stimulation. And then that really is what produced the shale revolution. Those sorts of ideas and innovation do tend to come out a lot from independents who are more innovative or risk takers. I wouldn't say more innovative, but they're more willing to innovate and have a little more leverage, especially if they're privately owned, to invest a lot of capital and take more risks. So I think as we continue to move forward, and this definitely hits on the environmental aspect of things, the more that we have different operators from different basins and different plays taking chances on different technology, the more we will push forward the continued production, and my hope, increased production, but also cleaner production. And that, I think, is our biggest selling point. And certainly inside this room, we get it. Outside of this room, though, not necessarily. We need to do a better job as associations letting folks know that this basin not only is the most prolific, it's also the cleanest producing basin in the world. And from that perspective, independents have that story to draw upon to say, hey, look, we're going to continue to innovate. We're going to continue to push forward on technology and find new innovative ways, which is what's important for our future existence as an entire industry.
And with that in mind, we know that all the majors and all the independents and all the service companies that work within the industry are crucial to not only to the New Mexico economy, but essentially in all ways the global economy. As you guys can certainly see, these trades are pivotal in the work that we do throughout the Permian, and the best way to get involved through all three of them with your membership is, of course, to become involved in their committees and find ways to work together to strengthen their voice. Your individual voices as companies, of course, are raised the more that you work with these folks. They're good at what they do, and I'm very fortunate to call them friends, and we appreciate your listening to our panel this morning. Thank you.